Welcome to Mystic Realms Recap. Links are in the description below. Please show some love of the author and me. On to the show. Marco's face was as white as a sheet of paper from fear as he watched the pestilence leave the Thousand Leaves bar. He felt cold on his back as if he had just been soaked in water. Only when the footsteps finally faded away did he take in a long breath, and stretched out his hand to wipe the cold sweat on his forehead. For a while, he felt all energy sapped from his body as he sat weakly on the ground. Phew! At the same time, the group of adventurers from the Ruby Moon Mercenary Corps heaved a sigh of relief as well. The expressions on their faces were as if a heavy load had been lifted off their shoulders. For them, it was like having survived a holocaust. Just as everyone rejoiced, the door of the Thousand Leaves bar was pushed open. Then, the group of adventurers saw the long-legged beauty dash in and give Marco a kick in the face with her boots. "Who told you to be vulgar, shameless?" "Ah." The leather boots from the Silver Hand were tailored for all kinds of adventurers. The workmanship was not delicate, but the soles of the boots were horribly hard. The kick in Marco's face was similar to a hit using a whip, and the whole side of his face swelled up in an instant. HNG. The long-legged beauty crinkled her nose, and flipped her blonde hair back gently before walking away with a proud gait. The group of men from the Ruby Moon Mercenary Corps looked at each other, then looked at Marco with some sympathy. Of all people, he had to provoke a shrewish woman, who was also the well-known Chili Pepper from the Silver Hand. "Did you vent your anger?" Linley witnessed this scene in front of him as he stood outside the Thousand Leaves bar. For a moment, he was both dumbfounded and amused at the situation. "Who told him to speak such vulgar words?" Ina's nose crinkled kittenishly. "Ina, are you still adapting in the Silver Hand?" "Yes, I am. Everybody's very kind to me. Captain Marie is like a big sister to me. Mr. Fellick, Captain Marie is a beautiful woman. We went to the Nightmare Mountains the other day, and encountered a lot of magical beasts. And then At the mention of the Silver Hand Mercenary Corps, Ina's beautiful face was brimming with spirit. They wandered aimlessly through the streets of Alana. Linley listened quietly to Ina as she talked about her experiences, from how she left Gerosis to how she came to join the Silver Hand Mercenary Corps, then from the various missions she had gone through to their disputes with the Ruby Moon Mercenary Corps. At this moment, the long-legged beauty was like a cheerful little sparrow. But as she spoke, Ina's face suddenly turned gloomy, and there was a faint sobbing in her voice. "Everyone is very kind to me, but I still miss home and father." "Don't cry, it's all in the past." Linley patted her shoulders gently and comforted her in a soothing voice. "MHM. Oh, right. Ina, Mr. McGren asked me to hand this to you." Seeing that Ina was depressed, Linley hurriedly pulled out the half an arrow from his pocket in hope of diverting her attention. And it worked. As soon as he took out the half of an arrow, Ina forgot her grief, and confusion clouded her expression. "I seem to have seen this before. I remember that when I was a child, father often stared at half an arrow in a daze alone, sometimes for the whole afternoon. But later on, when I got older, father seldom took it out anymore." "Mr. Fellick, did father say anything when he handed this to you?" "Mr. McGren said to bring this half an arrow to the Eternal Shrine to look for your mother." "Mother?" Ina asked in astonishment. "Mr. Fellick, did father really said that?" "MHM. But father told all along me that mother had died of difficulties when she went into labor when she gave birth to me. It's probably because Mr. McGren thought you were too young to know these things. So he lied to you that your mother died when she gave birth to you." "MHM. Ina nodded heavily. There was finally some vigor in her sky-blue eyes. At least she knew that she still had relatives in this world. But where on earth is this Eternal Shrine? This question had plagued Linley in many ways ever since he had given his promise to McGren. He thought about many ways to search, and had asked many people about it, but he had yet to find a clue to the Eternal Shrine. "I remember that once, when father was drunk, he seemed to mention something about the shrine." Ina frowned, which actually made her look unusually lovely. "But I was young at that time and can't really remember much of what was said. I only remember father said that it was at a faraway place, and we'll have to cross the Sea of Darkness to get there. Cross the Sea of Darkness? Linley started in surprise. Even he, a transmigrator, had heard that the Sea of Darkness was an endless sea. There were all kinds of magical beasts in the sea, and all were 100 times stronger than the magical beasts on land. Hence, there was another nickname for the Sea of Darkness, the Sea of Death. In the history of Amril, no one had ever crossed the taboo sea. Did McGren accomplish this feat without anyone knowing when he was young? It didn't seem possible. It was unknown how many magical beasts were lurking in the Sea of Darkness. These ancient magical beasts had been living in the sea as early as the years of the Flood, when the dragon and Titan were competing for hegemony. Their strength was far beyond the human ability to compete. Even in the Dark Ages, the powerful High Elves did not dare to provoke the majesty of these sea tyrants. No matter how many secrets McGren hid, he was still only a level 6 warrior. Even if he used destruction combat energy at the cost of his life, he was merely a level 10 warrior at most. He could not even compete with Linley with such a strength, so how could he compete against the ancient magical beasts? They were an abnormal existence that could even crush an archmage with a mere breath. However, other than this, what else could explain the mystery surrounding Eternal Shrine? To be honest, Linley had asked many people about it for a while now, including Macklin. Linley had approached the subject without coming straight to the point, but the answer was surprisingly consistent: what bird crap Eternal Shrine? Never heard of it. Seeing that the young mage was silent for long, Ina asked with some curiosity, Mr. Fellick, what's on your mind? Oh. Nothing. Linley shook his head, and put aside the Eternal Shrine for the time being. After some ponderment, he quietly asked the long-legged beauty, Ina, when are you going to return to Gerosis? I'll return whenever Mr. Fellick decides to return. Ina was blushing, and her voice was light and soft, but her eyes were resolute. For a lady, perhaps there was no more definite hint than that. Unfortunately, she had overestimated Linley's ability to take hints. In the face of such a clear hint, this fellow actually said in all seriousness, well, you stay in the Silver Hand for the time being. I'll bring you back to Gerosis after I finish the trial. Oh, there was a trace of disappointment in Ina's eyes. However, giving that big hint had exhausted all her courage, such that her heart was still pounding hard at this time. How could she still muster the courage to give him another hint? Oh, right, Linley considered something for a while, and drew out a few bottles of potions from his pocket. Take these. Drink the brown one if you're injured, and the black one if you're poisoned. Also, if you encounter a fierce magical beast, drink the orange one, and run away immediately. Can you remember it? I've gotten it. Ina sensed Linley's concern for her, and a hint of sweetness welled up in her heart. Linley repeated his reminders. After making sure nothing was left out, he waved goodbye to Ina and walked alone in the direction of the Guild of Magic. It was getting dark by the time Linley returned to the Guild of Magic. The guild hall was buzzing with noise during the day, but it was more or less deserted and cheerless at this time. After a busy day, Linley was rather exhausted, and was about to go through the tree-lined path back to his room when he suddenly heard a voice behind him. The most cunning fellow there, wait up. Linley looked back, and saw that it was Macklin with his goat-like beard. The old fellow looked a little different from the day. The black mage robe was loosely worn on his body, and the hood was not pulled. His messy hair resembled a chicken's nest. Do you have any instructions for me, Mr. Macklin? Linley was a little stunned. He wondered what the old fellow had done to make himself look like this. The old fellow came over. He took a glance at the surroundings, then rubbed his hands embarrassingly as he whispered to Linley in a low voice, I'd like to ask you for a little help. Ah? Linley was startled. He was clear about the old fellow's strength. A level 19 archmage was actually asking for his help. It's not a big deal. Just follow me. Linley's heart was full of confusion. He contemplated for a while, and decided to follow Macklin. They went out of the guild hall, and into a low building just next to it. Macklin took Linley around a few corridors, and they soon arrived at an unlatched door. Through the open door crack, Linley could clearly hear the sound of clanking. He was all too familiar with the sound. Hearing the familiar noise, a bizarre expression came across Linley's face. No wonder people said that the more formidable a person was, the more psychopathic he became. It seemed that this was indeed right. Look at this level 19 archmage, hiding in his room forging iron. A dignified level 19 archmage was actually hiding in his room, forging iron. It felt absurd. It was like seeing a millionaire kneeling down on the street, begging for food. Before Linley came over, he had never thought that the old man with a goat-like beard had mysteriously called him over to help him with the forging. Mr. Macklin, Linley stood at the door with some confusion on his face. Let's go in first. The expression of the old fellow was as if one of a thief's. He walked to the door and took a look at the surroundings, then, after confirming that no one had discovered them, he lightly pushed open the door that was left unlocked. Linley was confounded. This old fellow really had nothing to, he could get anything he wanted as an archmage, so was it necessary to be this secretive? Hurry, close the door. Linley had just entered the room when he heard someone speaking from the furnace. And then, Linley had gone crazy. The old man by the fire was short and thin, and was wearing a large black mage robe. From a distance, he looked slightly hunched. Amidst the clear banging sounds, the old man struggled as he wielded the hammer, and dazzling sparks were formed as he smashed down on the anvil. Damn, the moment Linley saw the hunchback old man, Linley felt that he had really gone mad. He really wanted to ask the two old fellows, is the world really so difficult now? Even they had fallen to the point of working as blacksmiths. Let alone Macklin, now, even Aldwin, the level 21 legendary mage, was actually standing beside the furnace. But to be honest, the president's workmanship was too crude to be true. A piece of bright red iron embryo was knocked into a hideous mess by him. His strength was inconsistent, and the hammer often came down on the wrong spot. There were at least 5 times out of 10 that the hammer had landed on the anvil. Watching the president forge iron was a fast trigger for a heart attack. Occasionally, Linley was worried that the hammer in the president's hand would suddenly fly out and smash someone. Take a rest, I'll do it. As soon as Macklin entered the room, he took the hammer from the president. Aldwin was utterly exhausted as well. Seeing that someone was here to take over, he immediately handed over the hammer. He wiped away the sweat on his forehead as he gasped for breath. After a while, he seemed to abruptly notice Linley, who was standing in the doorway. Little fellow, it's you? Aldwin was rather surprised. Ah? Linley's face revealed some astonishment. He was sure that he had never seen Aldwin before today, but the legendary mage's tone sounded like he'd known him since long ago. Anduin didn't tell you? Aldwin chuckled, and there was some helplessness in his expression. The old fellow had boasted to me several times, saying that he had picked up a genius in the Sunset Mountains. You know Anduin? More than that. We are old friends. No wonder, Linley finally understood the situation. No wonder, the old fellow had smiled at him for no reason at all this morning in the guild hall. So it turned out that he knew who he was all along. Oh, right, I have a grandson, you know him for sure. Your grandson? Linley was baffled again. He might know Anduin, but how would he come to know his grandson? He's called Bathriller. What? Linley almost lost his soul from the scare. He had never imagined that this old fellow was actually Bathriller's grandfather. Aldwin chortled upon seeing how big Linley's reaction was. Relax, young man. I won't do anything to you. My grandson is a good-for-nothing. The whole Alana knows that you've broken 2 of his fingers and taught him a lesson. It's a good thing. I've lived many years and I'm not unreasonable. Besides, you're Anduin's disciple. That old man. I've to give him some face. I've heard that he's very close to Grim Burnside from the Pharmacists' Guild. I have a lot to ask him in the future. Ah. Haha, the smile on Linley's face was stiff. He still remembered vividly that it wasn't just about breaking 2 of his fingers. If it hadn't been for old Grim's intervention, he would have killed Bathriller. Now that he was standing in front of Aldwin, even if he was thick-skinned, he couldn't help feeling a little uncomfortable. "Young man, what are you doing, still standing there? Come and help me quickly, I can't hold out any longer." The workmanship of these two old guys could be said to be half a caddy and half a tail. Macklin was slightly better physically, and could manage hammering for a bit longer, but it was only a few more times. In only a short time, that old fellow was unable to hold out. He was pressing Linley for help while muttering under his breath, "Damn, the blacksmith is really not a job for humans." Okay, the call was just what Linley wanted. He felt awkward standing in front of Aldwin, so he pulled up his sleeves and walked over. "Mr. Macklin, may I ask, what, exactly is this?" Linley looked at the bent iron embryo, and his heart couldn't help mourning for it. These two old fellas were really some talents. A good piece of fine iron was beaten into such state by them. Look at what the iron embryo was wrecked into. Was that a steamed bun or twisted roll? This is called forging. Macklin did not care about it at all, and boasted vigorously. "You know, blacksmith? A very impressive profession." Linley really wanted to kick him in the face. Blacksmith? And a very impressive profession? Is he trying to bully me, seeing I'm from Gerosis? Of course, you don't have to be nervous. Seeing that Linley was silent, Macklin twisted his goat-like beard satisfactorily, and bragged shamelessly. "With the two masters of forging with you, I guarantee you'll soon become a decent blacksmith yourself. Come, take a look at how I use the hammer. This is a highly technical matter." And then Linley saw this old fellow actually lifting the hammer with both hands. Dang! A crisp sound rang out, and the hammer landed firmly on the anvil. As for the cooled iron embryo, it fell to the ground with a sound upon contact with the hammer. Even Macklin, whose face was as thick as a wall, could not help but blush at that moment. He picked up the iron embryo in a hurry, and placed it back on the anvil. Then, without shame, he once more said to Linley, "See that? What I demonstrated just now was a failed forging. You must not do it like that in the future. You have not the skills of a master like me. If you make a mistake, you might hurt others easily." Linley rolled his eyes, and thought to himself, "Isn't that nonsense? This is iron forging, not stone forging. Is there someone like you who hammers with both your hands? All right, your turn." Fortunately, although Macklin was thick-skinned, he still had some shame. Even he himself knew that he might cause some accident if he went on demonstrating. After dismissing it with a few words, he handed the hammer to Linley. "Mr. Macklin, may I ask again, what are you trying to forge?" Linley shook his head, and took the hammer from Macklin. He picked up the cooled iron embryo, and threw it into the furnace, to smelt it again. These two old fellas were really some geniuses. The iron embryo had become so cold, yet they were still hitting away happily. After the iron embryo was thrown into the furnace, Linley began to pull the bellows. Amid the sound of puffing and blowing, the flame in the furnace became more and more vigorous. When the vigorous flame had burned the iron embryo red, Linley used an iron plier to clamp it out, and with a fling, the burning red iron embryo fell lightly on the anvil. Macklin was flabbergasted by the fluent display of skills. This kid is not a blacksmith, is he? I'm actually in luck," the old fellow muttered in a low voice. His mood was greatly lifted in that instant. When he first called the young man over, he had just wanted to look for a free coolie to help them with the tough work. In Macklin's mind, the young man's physical strength was better than that of both Aldwin and himself. This rough forging job could be left to him, and he and Aldwin could do something that required a higher technical skill. He had no idea that he had found a treasure this time. Look at what he had done, it was so much better than a half-baked man like himself. Macklin was full of excitement. "We need a sword." "Ah?" Linley stood blankly for a moment. The two old fellows had hidden in the room mysteriously just to forge a sword? Were they too free? They were an archmage and a legendary mage. Why did they need to forge a sword for no apparent reason at all? Were they planning to use it for suicide? I'll tell you the use of it at a later time. You just focus on hitting the iron well. Anyway, if you manage to forge a formidable sword, I guarantee you some great advantage. What advantage do I get? Macklin hesitated for a moment. At last, he made up his mind, and said with clenched teeth, I'll gift you a lost level 15 spell. Linley was taken aback. What was the concept of a lost level 15 spell? When the Merlin family tried to curry favor with the Guild of Magic, what Cromwell sent them were just a few lost level 14 spells. And look at Macklin, gifting a level 15 spell at once. The difference between a level 14 and 15 spell was not only one level, it was also the difference between a magic shooter and an archmage. The disparity in realm doomed these two spells to be far from each other in power. Linley wondered if the old man was mad. He had only wanted to forge a common iron sword, it was not even a magical equipment. He even took out a lost level 15 spell for such a broken thing. Did he have to make it into such a serious matter? Is it really just an iron sword? Seeing how solemn Linley was in asking that, Macklin hesitated for a moment, then added awkwardly, it's best to be razor-sharp, such that it'll be able to pierce through leather armor. Razor-sharp, Linley murmured, and did not continue further. It'd be best to pierce through leather armor. What bird crap requirement was this? Could these two old fellows be more daring in their pursuit? In this city of Alana, even buying the cheapest ironware from any weapons store would not be something as simple as piercing through a leather armor. But it was good that they were asking for less, he could save himself some trouble. With the level 15 spell in mind, Linley lifted the hammer in a merry mood. Dang! 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 The hammer fell heavily, and sparks spattered off the anvil. Amidst the clanging sound, the red iron embryo slowly unfolded. Linley held the heavy hammer in his hands, but it seemed to be without any effort. He waved the hammer with such ease as if he was holding only a brush, and presently, he was using the brush to paint a scroll on the anvil. In the crisp clattering sound, the red iron embryo gradually presented the early form of a single-handed sword. An ordinary iron sword was too simple for a smithing guru. Linley didn't even put much effort into it, he was merely hitting casually. But in the eyes of two old fellows, it was like having seen a ghost. Their eyes were dazed as they watched. They had hidden in the room for half a month, yet still failed to accomplish the task. But when it fell into the hands of this kid, it seemed to be as easy as having a meal for him. Look at how he landed the hammer, and at the strength he used for hitting. This was a standard that only a veteran blacksmith could achieve. The two old fellows looked at each other with a strange look on their faces. Between the two of them, Aldwin knew the most about Linley. At least, he knew that the kid was a real magic genius who was picked up by Anduin in the Sunset Mountains, but Anduin never seemed to have said that, besides being a magic genius, the kid was an impressive blacksmith as well. Macklin had it even worse, he had just blown his trumpet in front of that kid, saying he was some blacksmith master. In the mere twinkling of an eye, he had found that the kid was 100 times better than them in workmanship. This was more embarrassing than being caught catting around. Luckily, the old fellow's skin was thick enough. Although I am not a master of forging, I've actually picked up a real master of forging anyhow. This is something of a feat. Macklin consoled himself at the side. On the other side, Linley had already put the iron sword into the water bucket. There was a sizzling sound, and a plume of white mist rose. The iron sword had gone through the final quenching. Linley put the hammer aside and clapped the dust on his hands. The iron sword is ready, Mr. Macklin. As for the level 15 spell. The old fellow was secretly gloating when he heard a sizzling sound. By the time he had come back to his senses, that kid was already asking for the level 15 spell. Macklin gave a start of surprise. So fast? Linley rolled his eyes, and mumbled to himself, it's considered slow this time. Macklin was not convinced. He stepped up to the bucket and tried to pick up the half-sword body that had just been quenched. He had just stretched his hand out when he felt as if something had bitten him. Macklin retracted his hand in alarm, only to find that his hand had been cut a thin slit. The old man was dumbfounded for a moment. Kid, come with me. Macklin did not even address the wound on his hand as he dragged Linley out of the room. "Mr. Macklin, what's the matter? Just come with me and you'll find out." They left the low-rise building and returned to the guild hall. This time, Macklin did not stop. Instead, he took Linley straight up the spiral staircase, all the way to a room on the 3rd floor. Macklin stood outside the door and whispered a short spell. Then, Linley saw the closed door suddenly open. "Come in with me." "Okay," Linley followed promptly. The furnishings in the room were quite simple. A table and several rattan chairs were all the things in the room. Linley looked around and found that there was not even a trash can in it. "Tell me frankly, kid," Macklin's face was grave but his voice sounded slightly agitated, "how do you know forging?" Linley hesitated for a moment, and did not know how to explain it. Was he going to tell the old man that his forging knowledge was all because of something called the Scroll of Wishes? Wouldn't the old man kill him with one of his fireballs? "I'm just asking, you don't have to be so nervous." Macklin thought the kid was frightened by his serious manner, seeing the look on his face, and he immediately regretted it. This kid was the treasure of the Guild of Magic now, and he could not be frightened. If he was frightened badly, it would be trouble for the whole Guild of Magic. The old fellow spoke some words of comfort as he squeezed out a smile on his face, but to Linley, it felt like a weasel paying respects to the hen, someone harboring ulterior motives. "Mr. Macklin, as a matter of fact, I do not know forging, but my family runs a blacksmith shop. I just learn whenever I'm free." After thinking about it, Linley finally chose such a reason that was more easily acceptable. Oh, Macklin had just asked a casual question, and the answer he had gotten was reasonable, so the old fellow naturally did not suspect anything. "Do you know how to forge other metals, besides refined iron?" Macklin seemed to be worried that he would not understand him, so he made a point of explaining. "Magical metals such as mithril." "I think I know a little," Linley answered cautiously before knowing Macklin's purpose. "Great!" Macklin slapped his thigh, and stood up excitedly. "Fellick, you've done us a great favor." "Ah?" Linley was bewildered. No hurry, no hurry. I'll tell you later." Macklin felt a sense of relief, and his old face was beaming. He reached out into his pocket and fumbled for a while, then pulled out a roll of crumpled parchment. "You put this away first. This is the level 15 spell, Mana Disruption." Linley received it nonchalantly. "All right, thank you, Mr. Macklin. Don't look down on this spell, kid." Seeing the indifference on his face, the old fellow kindly reminded him, "This is a really good thing. If it weren't for your help, I wouldn't take it out. To tell you the truth, this is a level 15 spell, but if it's used well, it could be more powerful than a level 17 or 18 spell. Do you understand the meaning of mana disruption?" "No, I don't," Linley answered matter-of-factly. Linley was not to be blamed. Such was the case of a spell recorded on a scroll. Before one learnt the spell, one wouldn't know the kind of effects it had. One could only analyze the structure of the spell from a few isolated words and phrases, and guess some useful information from it. For example, the crumpled parchment in Linley's hand, he could only analyze the structure to know that it should be a spell that was highly dependent on the mental strength because there were several characters in the spell which were used to stimulate the mental strength. The so-called mana disruption refers to the use of mental strength to deal an impact, interfering with the opponent's mana, and thereby creating an effect similar to mana retroaction. Of course, you'd have to have a strong enough mental strength. If your mental strength is not strong enough, this spell, which disrupts the opponent, will probably make you suffer in turn. Macklin's face revealed a trace of pride. As long as you master this spell, even if you don't know any other spells, you could walk with airs in front of an archmage. The old fellow continued bragging, but Linley did not respond at all. He was entirely appalled. What kind of a concept it was to use the mental strength to deal a direct impact. Such a spell had come into his hands. Providence was probably the only explanation for it. Linley knew very well the condition of his own mental strength. The strong enough mental strength that Macklin had mentioned was not a problem to him at all. Under the impact of his massive mental strength, Perhaps he could really be able to walk with airs in front of an archmage. At the thought of all that this spell might bring, Linley tightened his grip on it in spite of himself. How about that, kid? This is worth the help you've given us, right? Linley nodded profusely. Worth it, worth it. Although Macklyn's iron forging skills were bad, he knew how to strike while the iron was hot. As soon as he saw how fascinated Linley was with the spell, the old fellow took advantage of the situation and added, "How about doing us another favor?" "What is it?" "Help us forge a magical weapon." There was some hesitation on Linley's face. Magical weapons were not difficult to forge, anyway. These two old fellows didn't have strict requirements. He could just make them any two weapons that carried magical attributes. But Linley constantly had the feeling that this matter was not something of the ordinary. There was an eerie feeling to it from the very start. Think about it carefully. Skip the part about the two powerhouses hiding in a room while forging iron. It could be a mere hobby or interest, after all. There were many wonders in the world. Anyway, even SM had many fans. It seemed to be not much of a big deal forging some iron. However, an ordinary iron sword was exchanged for a level 15 spell, and it was such a powerful level 15 spell, no less. Linley was baffled. Macklyn was not an idiot. Would he be that silly not to be able to differentiate whether the ordinary sword or the spell was more precious? Linley never once felt that he had some kind of a kingly aura, and that when his body moved slightly, he could scare such figures like Macklyn and Aldwin into bowing down. One who is unaccountably solicitous is hiding evil intentions. Linley had kept these words in mind. How's that? Macklyn was a little anxious, seeing that Linley was silent for a long while. He continued to entice him. Just a magical weapon. It doesn't have to be very strong, just containing some magical attributes will do. You can consider it. As long as this thing is done, us two old fellows will be very grateful to you. Linley scratched his head, but kept mum. He wanted to hear what exactly was the gratitude the old fellow had mentioned. Let's do it like this. Macklyn saw that empty promises were not enough, so he bit his teeth, and said, "Once you forge this magical weapon, you can ask us a favor. As long as it is within our power, the two of us will definitely help you." As soon as Macklyn's words were uttered, Linley's hair stood on ends in horror. For the two old fellows, one a level 19 archmage, and the other a level 21 legendary mage, to say such words in their capacity, it was evident that the weight of the matter was not ordinary. This request held too many meanings. If Linley was willing, he could even ask them to sweep out the Shadow's Nest so that the Gerosis Guild of Magic would never have to worry about the enemies coveting the Demon Fall Valley again. By the way, I'll start by saying, the request and the trial are two different matters. This trial is arranged by the Supreme Council. No matter how bold Aldwin and I are, we would not dare to poke our heads in it. Linley shook his head in denial of his assumption. Of course I'll have to depend on my own strength for the trial. So, you agree to it? Can you tell me the reason behind it? Linley hesitated for a long time and his tone finally relaxed. To be frank, he was filled with curiosity about this matter. Sure, Macklyn replied coolly. Do you know of the Sword Sage of the Storm? I don't know, Linley was telling the truth. Since the transmigration, the profession he had contact with the most was the mage, and it was all because of Anduin. He had always been concerned about stuff related to magic, and had not paid much attention to what a sword sage or a shadow king was. You know Aldwin's strength, right? Felon Kingdom's most powerful level 21 mage. I know. In the Felon Kingdom, those who can compete with Aldwin can be counted with one hand, and the Sword Sage of the Storm, Alakir, is one of them. So formidable? He had always thought that it was more than enough to have a demon above level 20. Unexpectedly, there was more than one such monster in the Felon Kingdom. That's nothing, Macklyn pursed his lips, and went on to say, this B*TCH, besides being a level 21 powerhouse, is actually the one behind the Atlanta Adventurers Guild. Linley was confounded. The fellow's status was probably stronger than that of Aldwin's. What was the idea of the Alana Adventurers Guild? It had the most deformed monsters in the Felon Kingdom, and an astronomical amount of money in addition to millions of adventurers. It was horrifying just to think about such a force. There's more. Macklin shook his head, looking somewhat depressed. This B*TCH is also a master of forging. Very impressive. Linley still didn't get it. But what's that got to do with me? Be patient, listen to me. Macklin rocked softly in a rattan chair, recounting to Linley about a bizarre bet. It happened more than a year ago, when the Guild of Magic discovered a high elf relic. For any mage, the legacy of that era was full of fatal temptation at all times. Nobody, including President Aldwin, was willing to pass up on this opportunity. So, the work of exploring the relics began to proceed in an orderly way. They began with a search of all the information related to this relic from the mountainous pile of books on the Dark Ages, and the magic shooters inside the guild worked day and night to extract silk from the vast amount of information. At last, the Guild of Magic found it. The remains turned out to be the mausoleum of High Lord Osric. The key to opening the tomb was buried at the highest peak of the Nightmare Mountains, and it was guarded by a level 22 magical beast, the Lord of Inferno. That morning, under the leadership of President Aldwin, the Guild of Magic dispatched all the members beyond the level of an archmage. Their goal was the Lord of Inferno on the peak of the Nightmare Mountains and the key it guarded. But as they climbed up the Nightmare Mountains, they suddenly found that there was a group of people who were also eyeing the Lord of Inferno. It was a group of adventurers led by the Sword Sage of the Storm, Alakir. At the moment, even Aldwin's temper was triggered. He had studied so hard, but the result was stolen by others. Was there anything more annoying in the world than this? However, he soon realized that the Adventurers Guild was even more enraged than Aldwin himself, especially the Sword Sage of the Storm, who was so angry that he had demanded a duel with the latter on the spot. Fortunately, both sides had some self-restraint in the end. Through the personal mediation of His Majesty the King, the conflict that had shaken the whole Felon Kingdom did not occur, but was replaced by an arduous negotiation. Even Macklin himself was unaware until he had participated in the negotiations. All of this was merely a coincidence. It was just too much of a coincidence. The two guilds found the relic almost concurrently. They had both looked for clues from books, and discovered where the key was buried at the same time. The leaders of the two guilds were both wise men. After the misunderstanding was cleared, things became much simpler. The two guilds soon reached an agreement to kill the Lord of Inferno together, and everything would wait until the key was dug out. Although the Lord of Inferno was at a powerful rank of level 22, were Alana's two major guilds an ordinary force? Together, there was more than a dozen people who had broken through level 18 in the two guilds. After battling for a whole day and night, even a power like the Lord of Inferno did not manage to escape the fate of losing its life. With the fall of the Lord of Inferno, the ownership of the key was naturally to be put on the agenda. There was immediately a huge rift between the two forces who had once fought side by side. In order to get the other half of the key in the other party's hand, the two guilds had each offered an earth-shaking price without any prior consultation. At the end of the negotiation, the Adventurers Guild even suggested that half of its revenue would be allocated to the Guild of Magic in the next 10 years. But in front of Osric's mausoleum, the power of money was insignificant. Thus, the negotiation entered a stalemate. Finally, the Sword Sage of the Storm, who believed in force, made a suggestion. The leaders of the two guilds would fight a fair duel, and the one who won the duel would have the right to use the key, while the one who failed would receive a small portion of the benefits from the High Elf relic as compensation. To be honest, this was a perfect solution. However, a bizarre scene unfolded before them when it was implemented. The two fellows, both level 21, completely tied with each other. They had fought for 2 days and 2 nights. In the end, one ran out of mana, and the other one ran out of stamina, both fainted on the ring at the same time. It was like walking into a dead end when things got to this point. Fortunately, someone had reminded them. Besides being level 21 powerhouses, one was a master of inscription, and the other was a master of forging. Both parties came to a consensus quickly. Since violence could not solve the issue, they could only use their knowledge to determine whom did the key belong to. Frankly speaking, this was an absurd suggestion. Forging and inscription were two completely different fields. Furthermore, the heads of both guilds and both of these two figures were at the peak of their own fields. It was ridiculous for either of them to come out on top of each other. After that, the negotiations revolved around a single point. Was there any method to prove which guild was more superior when both guilds were from different fields? After another round of arduous negotiations, both sides finally came to an agreement. In the new round of debating, the deciding factor would no longer be the two heads of the guilds, but the members of the guild. Regardless of rank and position, they could partake in this competition as long as they were members of the guild. According to the agreement from both sides, the following was decided. Should a member of the Adventurers Guild be able to produce a high-level mage weapon, it would be the Guild of Magic's defeat. Conversely, should a member of the Guild of Magic forge a magical weapon, it would be the Adventurers Guild's loss. Linley was astonished after hearing this. As a master of both fields, how could he not know the difference? Making magical weapons might sound mysterious, but in reality, it was not complicated. With a magical metal, most middle-tier blacksmiths had a chance of producing magical equipment. On the flip side, producing a high-tier mage weapon would be much more difficult. Only a high-tier inscriber had a chance of doing so. The difference between middle and high tier was not as simple as it sounded. It required countless amounts of money and time, as well as an unexplainable difference in innate talent. Among 1,000 blacksmiths, at least 500 of them could reach middle tier. On the contrary, only 100 out of 1,000 inscribers could reach a high tier of mastery. This was decided by innate talent. It was the same pyramid structure in any field. Only a few people could climb up the stairs of a pyramid. On the surface, it was obvious that the Guild of Magic had an advantage in this agreement. However, that was just on the surface. After thinking about it, Linley finally understood. Even though the Guild of Magic seemed to be at an advantage, they were hugely disadvantaged due to the members of both guilds. Surely enough, at this point, Macklin cursed frustratedly. Shit. Al-Akir is such a cunning bastard. We were baited while not paying attention. Haha, Linley laughed without saying anything. The disadvantage was received unjustly by the Guild of Magic. There was a mixture of good and bad in the Adventurers Guild. There were many low-level adventurers, but there were legendary-level adventurers as well. Among the great number of adventurers in Atlanta, they made up for almost all of the different professions. Moreover, naturally, there were some mages that had not been registered with the Guild of Magic. Inscribing had always been a core subject for the Guild of Magic. Even though a high-tier inscriber was rare, who could guarantee that there was none amongst the vast number of adventurers? Conversely, the Guild of Magic was at a huge disadvantage. Firstly, it was the composition of the members. The Guild of Magic was inherently the guild for mages. There would not be any warrior that would be foolish enough to give themselves up to the Guild of Magic. Even if they did, what sort of benefits would they receive? Giving up all of their might, learning magic from scratch? Who would have the time to do so? Next, it would be the number of members. This was even more incomparable for the Guild of Magic. With the example of Jerosa's Guild of Magic, Jirian's subordinates, including those disciples below level 5, only had a full strength of a few hundred. Being the center of the Felon Kingdom, Alana's Guild of Magic was stronger. However, there was only a maximum of 3,000 members. With these numbers, how could they compare with the Adventurers Guild? After listening till this point, Linley already knew that Guild of Magic was going to be out of luck. Indeed. When Macklin spoke of this, he felt sad, expressing a look of heartache. Within the past year or so, both old men were about to be driven mad. They searched everywhere within the guild for a mage that could forge so that they could win this gamble. Both men traveled all around the Felon Kingdom, including Jerosis, asking almost every guild of magic in hopes of finding a mage that could forge. However, A genius like Linley, who was adept at every profession, could not be easily found. For more than half a year, they could not even find a mage that had dabbled in forging, much less a middle-tier blacksmith that could produce magical equipment. This was indeed almost impossible. A strong mind with a weak body was the characteristic of a mage. A mage with powerful magical elements had no intention of training their physical strength. A strong body was meaningless from their point of view. Would a strong body be able to withstand the blast of a fireball? A blacksmith was not a well-respected profession, unless he could reach a high level and guarantee that every weapon he forged had magical attributes. Otherwise, which mage would be willing to undertake such an arduous but fruitless task? On the other end, the Adventurers Guild was able to find a suitable candidate quickly. 6 months ago, the Adventurers Guild dispatched an adventurer with level of an archmage. He free-handedly produced a high-level mageweth under the full view of the public. The time initially agreed upon was 2 years. In other words, we only have half a year left. If we can't find a middle-tier blacksmith after these 6 months, the Guild of Magic will likely lose this gamble. So that's how it is, Linley finally understood after listening to the full description of the matter. No wonder these 2 old men were forging in the house. It was because the guild could not find anyone suitable, hence they decided to do it themselves. Unfortunately, these 2 old men had terrifyingly low talent for forging. They were still worse even when compared to Anduin, the pharmacist enthusiast. At the very least, Anduin could produce a few bottles of low-level medicine. These 2 old men were struggling to even hold the hammer. No problem. Linley nodded and generously gave his promise. It was just a magical weapon, it would not amount to much. Really? Macklin was surprised as he did not think this matter would be solved so easily. Of course. Linley nodded, and then asked, Mr. Macklin, when do you need this magical weapon? After a half a year. Seeing his steadfast attitude, Macklin felt thoroughly relieved. His old face was smiling. All right then, Mr. Macklin. If there is nothing else, I would like to go back and have a rest. Linley saw that it was getting late, so he decided to bid him farewell after discussing the details with Macklin. All right, I'll see you out. Hearing his words, Macklin showed him the way out with a smile on his face, brimming with joy. On the way out, he repeatedly advised the young mage to have a good rest, and not overexert himself. The old man could only settle down after idolizing him. This fella was not only a mage, participating in the trials, but someone that had relations to Osric's mausoleum. It could even be said that he was the hope of Alana's Guild of Magic. If this trial was not arranged by the Supreme Council, Macklin wanted to directly assign him as first place. Think about it. Once the relic, High Lord Osric's mausoleum, was opened, no other faction in the Felon Kingdom could go against Alana's Guild of Magic. After sending him off to the guild hall, Macklin hurriedly looked for Aldwin for a discussion. As for Linley, he left the guild hall through the back door, and walked along Sylvan Street. He was indeed slightly exhausted as he was really busy today. In the morning, he killed a phantom panthera. After that, he fought with members of the Ruby Moon Mercenary Corps, and even killed an adventurer with an icicle. In the afternoon, he was coerced into forging by these 2 old men at the Guild of Magic. After the whole day, he was thoroughly exhausted. No matter how energetic Linley was, he could not help but feel drained at this point. Unfortunately, that was how the world worked. The more you felt like resting, the less opportunities you had to rest. Just when he walked along Sylvan Street, he could hear commotion coming from the front. Linley could hear from afar a familiar voice that was cold and proud. With such an obvious trait, Linley knew who it was after thinking for a brief moment. Why was it Oren? Just when Linley was still confused and could not make out what was happening, an intense magical wave was suddenly released. If you're enjoying my content, please consider donating a coffee. Or checking out my shirts on TeePublic. Linley was surprised, and rushed in the direction which the magical wave came from. When he arrived, Oren had already collapsed on the floor. One of his arms was hanging limply, bent at an awkward angle. From the painful look on his face, this arm was most likely broken. Felek. Just when he was about to raise Oren up, Mason appeared, rushing breathlessly towards them from afar. I heard that idiot, Oren, got into trouble? Linley nodded, and spoke no more. He pushed his way through the gathered crowd, walking to the pale-faced Oren's side. Are you okay? Linley carefully lifted Oren, fearing that he might touch the broken arm. Nothing much. Oren painstakingly shook his head. A small movement like this could already cause his pale face to be filled with sweat. The pain due to a broken arm was not something anybody could bear, but Oren proved to be tough. He did not make any sounds even though the pain was causing his face to be as white as a sheet. After being lifted up, Oren's eyes continued staring at the crowd. Linley followed his gaze, and saw a young mage with a cynical look. This man was around 20 years old. He was very fair, but had a piercing laughter which made people uncomfortable. Heh heh heh. The genius from Rotterdam's guild was only at this level. I thought he was someone very powerful. How's it, Oren, weren't you very uncomfortable just now? Matthias, stop joking around. There is no genius from Rotterdam's guild, only a piece of trash. If he really was a genius, how could Gryffindor beat him up so badly? Just as Matthias' voice fell, there was somebody in the crowd picking it back up. That's right, he usually acts so powerful, yet he is so useless when he fights. Some sort of genius from Rotterdam's guild, how laughable. Maybe he got crippled by Gryffindor? Ha 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 ha. This mage called Matthias had two other fellas behind him. They had to be from the same group. The insults from the three of them made Linley somewhat pissed off, but he maintained his composure. He helped carry Oren while calling out to Mason for help. He had to admit that even though Mason had loose lips, he had a good personality. This fella would always bump heads with Oren. No matter the circumstances, they would definitely argue when they met. The relationship between them was the worst. When he heard that Oren had an injured arm, he should have gloated at the mishap even if he did not add salt to the wound. However, Mason did not have any intention of gloating when Linley asked him for help. He came over willingly to lift Oren up. Even Oren behaved in an unusual manner this time. Despite that, he had always been an introvert. Even though he was surprised, he only glanced at Mason, and did not say anything. Oren, don't worry, I will take revenge for you. Damn it, these bastards went overboard. They dared to beat you up, before I did. Mason carried Oren with an indignant look. Linley could not help but shake his head, he did not know what to say at this point. Both of them helped Oren out of the crowd together, and carefully placed him down at the side of a flower bed. Linley observed Oren's broken arm, which seemed to be severely injured. From the remnants of the magical wave left on the surface, this injury should have been caused by an arcane missile. How fortunate. These fellas were not brave enough to aim for Oren's chest. If this arcane missile had hit it, he would have been knocking on death's door. For now, it was just a simple broken bone. It would be cured with a bottle of recovery potion. Linley dug around his pockets and took out a bottle of recovery potion. Without a care for their unusual reactions, he uncapped the bottle and placed it beside Oren's mouth. Drink it. After passing the recovery potion to Oren, Linley softly asked Mason, Brother Mason, do you know where that group came from? You mean that pretty boy? MHM. They are from Sunrise City's Guild of Magic. I think he's called Matthias. The other two fellas are in one team with him, but I can't seem to remember their names. I heard they finished their trial mission yesterday with rather good results. They should be somewhat strong. Oh. When the two of them brought Oren to the side of the flower bed, the three fellas had followed suit. The two of you are in the same team as this trash? Matthias had a complacent look on his face, and scornfully looked at the two of them. He then shouted excitedly, Wow. So strong. A level 9 mage and a level 7 mage. No wonder you formed a team with Oren. Trash will always flock together. Who knows, they might be the same as Oren, a genius from some random guild. **T, Mason's temper could not tolerate such insults. His hands reached into his pockets, and he took out a thin magic staff. Hold up, Linley pulled Mason back, not letting him take any action, as he did not want Mason to suffer a loss. Irregardless of their strength, if these three could hurt Oren, it also meant that they were not weaklings. Oren was at the peak of level 11, and even he was injured. If it was the level 9 Mason, would he be able to survive? Let me go. Mason did not care about it. When he turned around, his face was red with anger, and his eyes were about to spew fire. Let me handle it. Linley's voice carried a commanding tone. Even with Mason's hot temperament, he let go of his magic staff immediately. You're Matthias, right? Linley glanced at the young, fair-skinned mage. May I ask what exactly is between you guys and Oren? What happened? Matthias was arrogant, he looked at Linley as though he was looking at an ant. Some people think themselves a genius and act arrogantly. Some of my friends talked him, yet he ignored them. Nothing to be cocky about. If he really was a genius, why would he be beaten up so badly by Gryffindor? What an idiot. Oh, Linley nodded, and seemingly understood. It was too obvious. Sunrise City and Rotterdam were both located at the northern border of Felon. The two neighboring guilds of magic should be in contact with each other. As for this Matthias, he had something against Oren in the past. Today, they finally met each other in Alana. If Matthias did not initiate a challenge, it would be unusual. Knowing Oren's personality, how could he let it slide? With all the nonsense they spouted and disagreements, it made sense that they started fighting. Surprisingly, it was Oren that suffered a loss. I, Matthias, am not an unreasonable person. To solve today's issue, Oren just needs to apologize to me, and I will pretend that nothing happened. Otherwise. Oh? Linley curiously asked. Otherwise, what would happen? Otherwise, only violence can settle it. Oren insulted our Sunrise City's Guild of Magic. I have the rights to request a duel from Alana's guild president. A duel? Linley stared at Matthias for a while and laughed suddenly. I wonder if a bedridden person would be able to participate in a duel. Matthias felt uncertain, yet he felt a sudden surge in mana. After that, there was a deafening sound. Before Matthias could snap out of it, a wind blade had already let out a sharp whistle. Oh, **T. Matthias was caught with his pants down. He did not imagine that this fellow would be so despicable, letting out a wind blade without saying anything. Fortunately, Matthias reacted quickly. He raised his elemental shield when he felt the surge in mana. When the wind blade struck the elemental shield, it only produced a rainbow-colored ripple. Although this wind blade did not hurt Matthias, his pride took a beating. He did not think this pathetic level 7 mage would dare to attack him when there were others looking. He even had to use elemental shield. In the eyes of Matthias, this was similar to getting a tight slap. Trash, you're gonna die. Matthias clenched his teeth. While casting delirium, he gripped his magic staff, and started to recite in hasty yet resounding manner. The spell that Matthias was reciting was Fireball. The rage in Matthias' heart could only be quelled by burning down the opponent into ashes with the use of this spell that was filled with anger. On the other end, Linley seemed to be dumbfounded after casting Wind Blade. He did not recite other spells, nor did he raise his elemental shield. He only stared at Matthias casting Fireball. Boom! The fireball flew towards Linley frenziedly, leaving a trail of smoke behind it. Then they saw something they would never forget. Everyone witnessed how the level 7 mage stood in a daze when he saw the fireball. He stood rooted to the ground, allowing the flames to engulf him. This was followed by a distortion in the surroundings. After that, they realized that the level 7 mage was still alive, while the blazing fireball had vanished. Completely vanished. The glaring glow of fire was gone, and the long trail of flames was nowhere to be seen, even its strong sense of destructiveness was wiped off instantaneously. Not a single trace of magical wave was left. Everyone was stunned by the disappearance of the fireball. The crowd observing the battle was all distinguished members of their own guild of magic. Among them, many were renowned and powerful mages. Even the least skilled was at least a level 8 mage. How could they not understand what was unfolding before their eyes? Never would they have imagined that it was possible to swallow a fireball without the protection of the elemental shield. At that moment, the silence was deafening. Everybody was stunned as they stared blankly at Linley as though he was a frightening creature. A monster, someone shouted among the masses after a while. As though it was a contagious disease, this sentiment started to spread among the crowd. What followed was a wave of discussions in subdued voices. Did my vision blur? That was really a fireball? How could it not result in any harm? What the heck, is he still alive despite being hit by that fireball? Is he even human? Hey, how about you go and have a taste of that blow? Which guild of magic is that freak from? I have never heard his name before. The Guild of Gerosis. I heard that he's the illegitimate son of Gerion. Never knew that old man treated this brat with such partiality. For real? Absolutely. How else could he be so outstanding? How was it even possible? Muttered Matthias. He was so stupefied that his eyes were as wide as that of a cow, and his expression was as though he had just met a ghost. He nearly died from instant shock due to that fireball. Matthias was so confused. Without the protection from the elemental shield, how did his opponent manage to withstand the impact of the fireball? What was more, a fireball was not a loaf of bread. How could it be swallowed by a human being? Before Matthias had time to make the situation clear, the sound of recitation could be heard from a distance. What followed was a sudden flash of light blazing into the eyes of Matthias. In his vision, a fiery sphere with a long trail of flames grew larger and larger. Boom! An ear-splitting explosion could be heard when the fireball collided with his elemental shield, creating dazzling and vivid sparkles as the fireball erupted. Under the attack of a level 8 magical element, a bright glow was reflected on the elemental shield. Seeing that, Matthias heaved a sigh of relief. Luckily, that elemental shield could defend him from a fireball. Being the most outstanding mage, Matthias was certain that 5 seconds were the timing needed for calling out a fireball. Although 5 seconds were not long, they were sufficient for Matthias. That was because the timing required for Matthias' elemental shield to cool down would be 4 seconds. After that, both men would be back to square one of their battle again. At that moment, Matthias was filled with confidence again. To him, the dire situation he'd encountered previously was only due to that one fireball. Once everything restarted, it would very likely be a sure win for him since his opponent was a level 7 mage. He did not believe that a level 7 mage had the ability to swallow 3 fireballs. Yet, Matthias' prediction was not entirely correct. After swallowing the first fireball, it was a given that Linley did not have any ability to take in another blow. However, what he could do was to spit out the previous one that he'd swallowed. Matthias suddenly realized he got surrounded by those blinding sparkles again. Boom! The sound of explosion was so loud that it echoed in everyone's hearts. Matthias' heart sank at once. *T. In this instance, the only line that Matthias felt like screaming was, "God damn it, this rascal cheated." All these were indeed a fraud. It was clear that the second fireball was released with 0 recitation. It merely shot out when the level 7 mage raised his magic staff. My god! Isn't that a level 8 skill? Not to mention that he was only a level 7 mage, a level 17 archmage would also not have the skills to unleash a level 8 spell immediately. This was totally against humanity, and also breached the laws of magic. Every time a spell was upgraded by a single level, its complexity would be increased by multiple times. It was almost impossible for a level 8 spell like the fireball to be unleashed instantaneously. The compression of a 5 seconds long recitation would complicate the magical elements within it by numerous folds. No mortal, even if he were to have a huge mental capacity, would be able to summon a spell like that. The intricacy of the spell was totally incomprehensible to any normal human being. But, how could one explain what had just happened before their eyes? The crowd of mages fell into a frenzy. Firstly, they already thought that the act of Lin Li swallowing a fireball was a feat out of this world. Then, they grew totally incredulous with what happened thereafter. This crazy fella could summon a fireball instantaneously. At that moment, everyone had the impulse to crash into the wall because of what they had witnessed. That was such a contradiction to human nature. Pom! A fireball dropped onto the trembling elemental shield, and the collision generated a series of uncontrollable magical waves. In that instance, the tremendous impact inflicted on Matthias' elemental shield caused the plate to split into 1,000 fragments. Without the last layer of protection, he was as though a disrobed young lady, confused and terrorized by the hideous laughter of perverts surrounding her. After Matthias got disarmed by the fireball, Linley grabbed the opportunity to continue his attack. He raised his right arm and unleashed a series of arcane missiles on the poor man. Ah! The excruciating cry of Matthias reverberated lastingly. In the midst of that shrill shriek, everyone heard a distinct crisp sound as well. They knew that it was the sound of bones breaking. For arcane missiles created 4 explosions, also breaking the bones of Matthias. Unlike how he treated Oren, breaking one of his arms, the ruthless Lin Li was more thorough in his actions. He broke all 4 limbs of Matthias. The agonizing pain from his broken limbs was so tormenting that it went beyond what normal human beings could handle. His blood-curdling wails were never-ending, and sent shivers down everybody's spines. Squirming on the ground in a pool of sweat, Matthias was like a dried shrimp that was soaked in boiling water. "You are free to submit your application for a duel now," jibed Linley as he looked at Matthias in disdain. Then, his glance fell on the 2 mages who were chiming in previously. He raised his brows in contempt, but inquired politely, "May I know if my teammate had offended your guild as well?" No. He's right. Absolutely not. Lin Li's sarcastic tone as he asked his question, contemptuously, was so terrifying it nearly drove their souls out in fear. While denying, both of them inched backwards as if they could break off any relationship they had with Matthias that way. He had to be joking. Not to mention, if Oren had even offended any guild, if he really had, who would have had the guts to admit it in front of this freak? Should they agitate this fella, how would they survive his 4 arcane missiles? They would have to be mad to challenge him. It's Matthias. He tried to sow discord between us and Brother Oren, one mage said. Why yes. He's really a sly fella. The second mage followed suit. After nodding profusely to make themselves seem more credible, they strided towards Matthias and gave him a strong kick with zero hesitation. Having lost all his limbs, Matthias was already pitiful enough. Tears of pain were already welling up in his eyes. With the additional kick, it was like splashing oil on top of fire. It aggravated his suffering, and caused him to roll around in greater pain. His screams intensified, provoking sympathy among the onlookers. Although Linley had seen many who decided to betray their own team at the very last minute, it was the first time that he witnessed such extremity. The thought of how harmonious the trio had been when they sneered and taunted contemptuously just then, juxtaposed with how swiftly they turned against each other, was so appalling. Scram! Linley waved his hands impatiently, not knowing how to deal with such incorrigible and selfish beings. "We will leave immediately," said both men in relief. The order for them to leave was such a solace to them. Thank God, our lives are spared. What seemed like a level 7 mage was actually a freak. The sight of Matthias lying gruesomely on the ground made both men question if he was even human. He was not only extremely powerful, but also vicious and ruthless. To the 2 men, these types of people were the most terrifying. Nobody knew the triggers that would provoke them, nor the reasons behind their desire to kill. No one would ever want to be mutilated or roll in excruciating pain, then lie lifelessly on the ground like dried shrimps. In the face of such a monster, who would not want to escape if they could? Both men scurried away. Wait, the voice of the pestilence sounded behind the duo. At this moment, fear weakened the legs of both men. What? Muttered the 2 anxiously. Did that freak change his mind? The thought of the current state of Matthias caused them to tremble in fear. What if this freak, Linley, changed his mind? Were they going to be treated like Matthias? Take this man away, Linley ordered. All right, replied both men as they heaved a sigh of relief. The feeling of having survived a catastrophe caused cold sweat to trickle down their spines. After that, Linley bent down and lifted Oren up. He looked back, and urged the shocked Mason, "Brother Mason, come over quickly. He is too heavy." "Oh," replied Mason as he was snapped back to reality. Yet, while carrying Oren, his expression remained odd. The parties who had partaken in the battle left, leaving behind dumbfounded audience. Everyone was stupefied, and their gazes towards Linley's gang showed hints of fear. They always thought that Gryffindor would emerge as the victor. Yet, the emergence of Linley, the self-proclaimed level 7 mage, in this fight inevitably undermined their confidence. Could Gryffindor exert the power of the fireball so instantaneously? Not to mention him, the mentors themselves would not have the ability to perform such an impossible feat. Almost everyone was praying not to meet any of these three people in the finals. If this were to be inevitable, they silently hoped that he'd suffer a calamity. This fellow was a total pestilence. Anyone who needed to confront him would be wretched, landing in a situation worse than contracting a plague. Linley was oblivious about himself being cursed. After carrying Oren back into the room, he went back to his room, alone. It was indeed difficult to deal with fractured bones. One bottle of the recovery potion might not be sufficient. For a full recovery, one might need additional supplements. After watching Linley enter his room, Mason could not help but continue to mutter, "Damn. Why am I the weaker one, despite being a level 9 mage?" Having clearly heard what was under Mason's breath, Oren put his uninjured arm over Mason's shoulders, and snapped, "Idiot." Yet, he was at a loss for words, and did not know how to comfort Mason. How could a level 7 mage have the outstanding ability displayed by that fella? Not to mention the two suspicious fireballs, the matter was definitely unfathomable for Oren as it subverted the common knowledge of magic. Just the 4 arcane missiles were sufficient for Oren to renew his judgment towards this strange teammate. The arcane missile was an authentic level 2 magical skill. Under the magic shooter level, it was impossible for the arcane missile to be launched at an instantaneous speed. This meant that this self-proclaimed level 7 mage owned at least the powers of a level 10 mage. And this was only at least. Oren had to admit that he lacked the skill to judge Linley's true capability. He could only base his entire deduction on that single battle. This implied that Linley's real ability might either be at the peak of level 12, or at the beginner stage of level 13. Definitely not what he claimed to be. Right after helping him to get onto the bed, Mason got scolded without any reason. This provoked all his rage he'd just suppressed. Mason grumbled, "God damn it. Even though you are injured, don't assume that I wouldn't beat you up. You can try." "Damn you," replied Mason as he glared hard at Oren, yet ultimately had to admit, "I don't dare to beat a patient." "So, you still don't believe that you are an idiot," Oren said as a smile came across his poker face. He asked, "Can't you tell that my injuries are recovering swiftly?" "What?" said Mason in shock as he glanced involuntarily at Oren's fractured arm. It was then that he realized how Oren tried to raise his arm, albeit with a pained expression. Yet, it was a fact that the broken arm had already received treatment. Wait, how is this possible?" Mason gasped, his eyes open as wide as a bull's. The sight before him seemed as though it was an illusion. It was only just then that he'd witnessed the agony Oren was in while he was helping him return to his room, the pain reflected through his facial features, and the awkward angle his arm was positioned at, which could not be falsified. Mason dared to bet his life on this. Oren's right arm had indeed been broken. Only a few minutes had passed. How could the recovery be so speedy? Mason got confused. He really hoped to ask Oren, "Brat, are you made of slime?" "That's why I said, you are an idiot." "Hey. If you are not an idiot, how are you still treating Felix as a level 7 mage? Isn't he one?" Mason exclaimed in much disbelief. "What crap?" Oren had changed a lot ever since he'd been injured. He started to show more feelings on his face, and became more talkative. It was rare that Oren did not scold Mason for such a foolish question. While he just rolled his eyes, he asked, "Have you ever seen a level 7 mage defeating and crippling a level 12 magic shooter?" Level 12 magic shooter. Mason cried out in surprise, and his expression became extremely odd. "You mean, Matthias is?" "What else do you think? If Matthias was a level 12 magic shooter, then isn't Felix a?" Mason felt that he was on the verge of turning crazy. He'd always thought that since he was a level 9 mage, he would be one of the strongest, and thus have an edge over the others with his powers. Never had he expected that only on the first day he'd meet a level 9 magic shooter. And it was this magic shooter who crippled his teammate without using much force. Should be the 13th level. Upon hearing such an almighty and terrifying status, Mason was beyond speechless, and was on the verge of a breakdown. God damn it. Is there still justice? Since we are all mages, why do we differ so much from each other? Come to think of it, this fella does seem younger than me. Mason was not alone. Compared to him, Oren was no better. His nature had made him more composed than usual. It was no exaggeration to claim that Oren was a true genius. He was acknowledged to be the most outstanding mage, across 300 years, at the Guild of Magic in Rotterdam. When he became an official mage when he was 12 years old, it alarmed the Supreme Council. They even sent an archmage to congratulate Rotterdam's Guild of Magic for their achievement in raising a prodigy. In the next 10 years, never had Oren ever slacked off. At the age of 21, his extreme talent, together with his hard work, allowed him to attain the status of the magic shooter. Oren had always thought that without Gryffindor, who had once defeated him, he would be the top mage of the Felon Kingdom. Yet just today, this top mage had already suffered a series of disappointment. First, being defeated by Matthias. Then, witnessing Felix's outstanding performance. Since Matthias was older than him by 3 years, and the ability of both men only differed slightly, the first case of his defeat due to a minor mistake was still tolerable. However, the freakish act by Felix had totally subverted his initial perception. A level 13 magic shooter at the age of 20. Would there be anybody else more terrifying than this? A level 13 magic shooter at the age of 20. Was there anybody more terrifying than this? Oren could not help but smile bitterly at the thought of the battle. What was he in comparison with this freakish roommate? Then, Oren thought of the bottle of medication he'd consumed. If he did not remember wrongly, that was called the recovery potion. The president, or his mentor, had once purchased a few bottles of the potion at an exorbitant price at the Guild of Rotterdam. Oren still remembered how shocked he was when he first heard of the price of the recovery potions. The cost of those potions was sufficient to fully equip a magic shooter. Oren still remembered how casually Linley had passed the bottle of recovery potion to him, as though the pricey bottle was just a random stone found on the roadside. It was only starting from this day that Oren knew how terrifying the self-proclaimed level 7 roommate was. Attaining the ability of a level 13 magic shooter when he was barely 20 years old, casually giving away an expensive bottle of recovery potion. Only an idiot like Mason would believe that he was only a level 7 mage. All in all, our roommate is definitely a freak, concluded Oren. When the duo was conversing, Linley came into the room, and passed a sparkling blue glass bottle into the hands of Oren. He did not say anything else, but only reminded him to consume it before sleeping. The sky gradually darkened. The trio, who had been restless for the entire day, was already so exhausted that they immediately fell into deep slumber. On the next day, Linley was awakened by the knocking on his door. As he rubbed his bleary eyes, what came to view was not Mason, but a person he'd never expected. "Mac. Mr. Macklin," Linley exclaimed as he saw the twitching mustache. His sleepiness vanished immediately. It was only then that he realized he had overslept. After the quest yesterday, Macklin had announced that everyone would meet in the hall at 8 o'clock in the morning. Not to mention the time then. It would be considered late to even go for lunch. Get dressed and follow me, Macklin said in an extremely calm manner. Yet, the words "I am extremely furious" were clearly inscribed on his old face. The thought of it all made Macklin shudder in fury. He wanted to put up the front of a mentor, and make those three fellas wait for at least 2 hours. He even had his grand entrance and lines planned if they were to get impatient. He would chide, "Without this bit of patience, how are you able to endure the tedious magic training in the future? Sigh, you youngsters are too short-tempered." Thus, old Macklin had been reading in the library the entire morning. It was only lunchtime when he slowly strolled towards the hall. Who'd expect that the hall was empty, not even a shadow was present. The rage nearly burst his lungs. In his anger, Macklin dashed over, only to discover the three fellas all sound asleep. With his usual temper, he would have long slapped them with his magic powers. Who cared which guild you were from? Just receive your due punishment. Unfortunately, among the three who were asleep, there was one who was not punishable. This, sir, was the hope of the Alana Guild. The forging of magic equipment, the winning of the bet with the Adventurers Guild, the possibility of attaining the key to the relic, it all depended on his mood. How would Macklin dare to offend such an individual? Even as he conversed with this man, he needed to weigh the tone of his speech. If he were to agitate him, where would the Guild of Magic find another middle-level blacksmith like him? Punishment? Only a fool would do so. Oh, muttered Linley as he observed the facial expression of the old man. He did not dare to delay any further, and immediately wore the robe of wrath and took his winter staff with him. When he opened his door again, Macklin was already knocking on the doors of his 2 other roommates. This time, the old man was not as courteous as he treated Linley. Linley saw the old man raise his arm and send 2 majestic arcane missiles. This burst opened the doors of both men immediately. Boom! That loud noise reverberated in the house. This unique way of knocking on the door brought Linley's memory back to Jirian, who lived in the city of Gerosis. The 2 consecutive loud noises were as though 2 ferocious claps of thunder, and woke Oren and Mason up in shock. What's the matter? Did Matthias create a racket again? Exclaimed Mason as he dashed out of the room anxiously, without even putting on his robes. Then, he saw the face of Macklin that was filled with fury. The old man shuddered so angrily that his mustache twitched. While glaring at Mason as though he was a monster planning to eat him up, he scolded, "How do you dare to ask me?" Mumbled Mason in a dumbfounded manner. "I will deal with you later," said Macklin in a lowered tone as he glared at Mason. He would keep his fuming temper at bay in front of the well-respected blacksmith. Macklin's threat caused Mason to tremble in fear. Darn it, I'm dead. What if that crazy old dude finds another Phantomapanthera to kill me? After threatening Mason, Oren came out of his room. As compared to the 2 of them who were more unsettled, Oren appeared to be more composed. Donned in a black robe, he was only taken aback slightly by the sight of Macklin. Oren also apologized immediately. "I'm sorry, Mr. Macklin, I'm late." This did not allay Macklin's displeasure. After scanning Oren for quite a while, he squeezed some words out of his mouth. "Follow me." Macklin was a man of words. He fulfilled his promise of punishing Mason. After leaving the Guild of Magic, the 4 people ventured into the Nightmare Mountains. They were in the previous day. The Nightmare Mountains seemed more lively today. Throughout their journey, the 4 people met 2 other small groups from the Guild of Alana, which were on a quest. It seemed that the Nightmare Mountains were a conducive environment to train young people. All of these mentors had selected this region to train their students. The road ahead was unusually rugged. Other than Macklin, who had attained the status of an archmage, no one could use the levitation spell. The rest of the men ventured arduously with the hastening spell, which could only advance their speed slightly. They could only utilize the feather fall spell to cushion themselves if they were to fall. Throughout the journey, they met numerous magical beasts. Although their power was on the basic level, the uneven terrain increased their struggles. For more than 2 hours, they had to be stopped by such battles along the way as they overcame the innumerable twists and turns along the way. "How good is it to be an archmage?" Mason muttered as he stole a glance at Macklin. With the help of the levitation spell, the man gracefully glided towards him as though a carefree traveler. How envious Mason was. What a fool! Macklin bellowed as though he could see through Mason's mind with his pair of penetrating eyes. He levitated above Mason's head, and gave Mason a sidelong glance. Instead of filling yourself up with envy, why don't you invest the same time to think about how to improve your skills? What's so special about the levitation spell? When you get to the legendary realm, the power of flight would enable you to surpass the speed of any griffin. Macklin scolded him, full of loathing. For real? Scram. I don't converse with fools, Macklin replied, not forgetting to give Mason a deadly glare. Then, he announced solemnly, to be honest, other than this fool here, the two of you have more potential. Furthermore, the opponent yesterday was just a gentle kitten that had failed to pose any challenge to you. After much consideration, I have decided to increase the level of difficulty by just a tiny, little bit. Do you see that jungle over there? Said Macklin as he pointed to a dense jungle ahead of them. Yes. Very good, said the old man as he nodded. Then, he fished out a map from his pocket, and instructed, I hid an interesting object somewhere in that jungle. Your mission is to find it and come back to me. Oh, yes. Here's a friendly reminder, said Macklin casually as he passed the map to Linley. I heard that there are some animals there which are not as friendly. You just have to be a little bit more careful inside, and there's nothing to worry about. Alright, keep the map well, and you are good to go. The expressions on the three's faces froze. Since the old man treated the lethal Phantoma Panthera as a mere kitten, if he claimed that the animals there are not as friendly, wouldn't that imply that the jungle was more deadly than it seemed? Mr. M. Macklin, are you not entering the jungle with us? Mason inquired meekly as he gazed at Macklin uneasily. Nah, said the old man as his mustache twitched, and he glared at Mason with a gloating expression. He continued guilt-tripping. Look at my age. Why would you want these old bones to accompany you? Mason was at a loss for words. It was only just then that the old man utilized the arcane missile to burst the doors open. He also employed the levitation spell, and glided through the nightmare mountains with ease. Didn't he consider his old age? Why was it then that when they were about to enter the jungle, he suddenly cared about his age? Hurry off. You only have an afternoon to complete the task. If you fail to get the object back to me before the sky darkens, how's that? Thought Macklin as he remained silent, but his threatening tone had already caused Mason to break out in cold sweat. Mason regretted his act of lazing in bed that morning. Now that they had provoked this old pestilence, they knew what was to come. Under Macklin's urges, the trio entered the jungle uneasily. Heck! Linley cursed as he took out the map. Could the old bastard outside the jungle be Gerion's brother? The map was a mess. The scribbles and curvy lines were as though stubborn earthworms lying around. Numerous red blots of ink splattered all over made the map look like a heavily freckled face. Among the red spots, there lay an X marking, boldly smacked in front of him like a cripple. Linley took quite an amount of time to make out what that old dude was even drawing. What a piece of abstract art, Linley sighed as he rolled up the map before putting it in his pocket. Since no one could understand this map, it was just a waste of space. Fellick, are you not using the map? Inquired Mason. This map. Just when Linley was about to lambaste Macklin, he heard some faint sound. Be careful. Right after him warning his teammates, a pack of three-eyed blood wolves appeared. Each of the wolves had red eyes, and carried a strong stench of blood. As compared to those they had met before, this pack of wolves was evidently more malignant. One wolf with a grayish-white coat stood out in particular. It had an extraordinary red eye, which was beyond sinister, just like a droplet of blood. I'm afraid that we might be in trouble now, Mason whispered as he gulped down his saliva nervously, and moved 2 steps backward subconsciously. Cut the crap, shushed Linley and Oren together. Even an adventurer of the lowest ranking would know that the level of a three-eyed blood wolf was to be deciphered based on the color of their eyes and fur coat. The lighter the fur and the redder the eye, the higher its level. This creature before them was definitely the king. There were at least 40 to 50 wolves behind this king that was at least level 12. How could the trio take it easy? Arwo. The howl of the king broke the silence in the jungle, and more wolves appeared. At once, the surroundings were filled with spots of red light and stench of iron. The shrilling howls reverberated in their ears, threatening to engulf them. The vast number of three-eyed blood wolves in the wilderness resembled a sea of blood. In that moment, more than 10 wolves crowded towards the 3 men. Kill them. Linley gripped onto his winter staff, and called on the hastening spell. While retreating, he also released 2 wind blades at his opponents. Oren and Mason, who were by his side, also took action, each calling out a magic shield and starting to recite the spell at top speed. Among the 3 people, Linley was the last to be exposed to magic, yet in terms of taking part in battles, he had the most experience. During the few months at the Sunset Mountains, he had already slain countless magical beasts. In that instant, his reaction was the fastest. His intention of employing the hastening spell and the 2 wind blades did not deviate from that of Oren and Mason, yet what differed was the impact of his powers. The methods which mages decided to employ in their battles were no doubt the most flexible among the other occupations. Depending on their opponents, the tactics utilized would also be different. Phantomopantheras were generally immune to magic. Since these creatures were proficient in the dark magic, one would be seeking death if he were to adopt this method, which resembled the flying of kites. A dark magic spell would strike down the kite from the sky. On the other hand, it would be different if one wanted to deal with a big pack of the three-eyed blood wolves. The powers of these three-eyed blood wolves were innately of extremely low standing. Even if they were to be led by the king wolf, to defeat a magic shooter would be an impossible matter. Linley did not need to worry that his kite magic would be overcome by magic that was invisible to the eye. Furthermore, there were still Mason and Oren. Although both of them had little experience in battling beasts, one was a level 9 mage, while another a level 11 magic shooter. Given adequate time to recite their spells, they would unleash a destructive force on the wolves. Just when Linley's wind blades led to waves of shrilling cries from the wolves, both of their recitals were also completed. As Oren raised his magic staff, tremors were also induced at once. Then, a huge spear made of stone appeared from the ground. Stone spears were only made of stone. In dealing with the escaping wolves, it lacked the sharpness required of a weapon to kill. The stone spear created only immediate injuries, and not many casualties. This was the true intention of the magic. It was not exerted with the intent to kill. Just like how a dead rat could incite a sense of disgust among a group of people, yet had no ability to kill, the attack with the stone spear was similarly not lethal, and only aimed to create fear among enemies. Which foolish wolf would pounce towards stone? As the wolf scrambled away from that stone spear, ripples were created in that sea of red. It resulted in a great turbulence. Even the growl of rage from the king failed to calm the situation down. To worsen the situation, the powers of Oren were unleashed. This was a total catastrophe. Rays of red radiated from Oren's magic staff, and violent particles that arose from the fire elemental power filled the air at once. The temperature was scorching, and the air appeared to be boiling. Numerous sparks beamed, lighting up the dark jungle as bright as day. What followed after was the sound of a great explosion. Boom! The rapid spread of embers birthed a sea of uncontrollable fire. The speed at which it was spreading was faster than a plague, as though the earth was covered in gasoline. A little spark would be sufficient to light up the ground. To the helpless wolves, that fiery meteor spelled doomsday. They had no place to hide or escape to. The only thing they could do was to watch how the flames engulfed them. In the sea of fire, there were endless cries of despair. The wolves, one after another, got swallowed by the blaze. An unpleasant burnt smell diffused with the pitch-black fumes as well. The fiery meteor had claimed the lives of nearly 20 blood wolves. A butcher, Mason did not forget to denounce Oren while he retreated towards a thicket with the ice armor. He, however, would never have expected that the madness caused by Oren's magic powers was a result of the ground-piercing spell he'd exerted. Arwo. Right after the three of them calmed down, another wave of howls came by. And then, they saw how leaves of the thicket moved with a rustle, and out came even more three-eyed blood wolves. Shit. Linley could not help but blurt out another swear. The collaboration of the trio had only enabled them to slay 20 wolves. Now that another 100 wolves appeared, how were they going to deal with them? Even if they managed to kill them all, what would happen if King Wolf called out another 200 or 300 underlings? Not to mention being bitten by the wolves, they would lose their lives due to exhaustion. Thank you for watching Mystic Realms Recap. Please like, share and subscribe. Have a great day.